Thank you all for coming. I want to introduce our panelists. First panelist tonight is Will Conway. Will is the former national organizing director for the Forward Party, and in that position, he has set up over a dozen state parties around the country. He's one of the leaders in the independent space. Really happy to have him here. Well, thanks so much for coming, and want to give you a chance to just tell us why you think what we're doing here in Indiana is important. I think he may be having some audio issues. So now we're gonna. Oh, are
Yep.
you with us, Will?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me? Sorry about that, guys.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I've been systematically destroying my resume for about 6 years now, as I've seen the American political structure sort of collapse around us, and for a whole lot of reasons, I think real local efforts across the country to bring together independent candidates, I think, is by far um, the most important thing we can be doing as patriotic Americans. So I'm incredibly excited for the work of Independent Indiana. I'm incredibly excited to be connected to people like you. So this is really fun.
Thank you. And our next panelist is Christopher Thrasher. Christopher is a national leader in the ballot access space, and also very involved in the independent movement all around the country. Christopher, can you answer that same question? Why you decided that to make time to join us here tonight?
Well, for one thing, I had the pleasure of working with you, Nathan, on the 2022 independent run for Congress, and I have a long history of working with ballot access, working with independent third party candidates, really working with parties across the parties and candidates across the political spectrum. But am keenly aware of the difficulties that arise for independent candidates and for third parties just to get on the ballot. You can make it's almost akin to having to run a marathon before you even get to the starting line with the ballot access laws in some states. So anytime a movement is working to not only actually allow for more choices on the ballot, but anytime an effort it is very organized to try and break the stranglehold of the status quo in our political discourse. I'm very much a fan. These days, I
Yeah.
do work within the two party system myself as a Republican, but at the same time, I still have an affinity for shall we say disruptors in the space, because I think about the one thing we can agree on as Americans across the political spectrum is that something is amiss right now, and these independent movements and especially what you all are doing in Indiana can only help fix the myriad problems we have right now. So I'm very pleased to join in this
Yeah.
evening.
Thank you. So Will, kind of piggybacking off of what Christopher just talked about, he mentioned that it seems like things are not not working well right now. In your estimation and based off of your experience with some of these, efforts to form new parties, are we going to need something to come outside of the two-party system to get us to a place where things can start to feel like they're working better again?
Yeah, I think so, for a couple of reasons. But the biggest really is incentives. If you're an elected official right now and a member of either of the major parties, it's incredibly difficult to stick to your guns and be a good person and stick to your own moral values. Um, the biggest myth in politics is that the election is held on the first Tuesday in November. It's actually not true. The election is held in the primary and actually sometimes at the convention. About 85% of elections are determined in the primary, not in the general election, and only about 10% of people vote in that primary. So in almost every election that we see, the people that an elected official has to convince to either get them elected or keep them elected are the primary voters, and those primary voters tend to be party stalwarts. You couple that with the noise that they hear on social media, and the incentives and the feedback loop for politicians is only the people who tend to be the most partisan. So the other 90% of the electorate is absolutely ignored. So can there be good people who come out of the major parties? Yes, but the headwinds are 80 miles an hour in the other direction. So it's really, really difficult.
Got it. Christopher, you have done signature drives all across the country. You're literally out on the ground talking to people, asking them to support candidates for office. What is your sense of what the people want? You know, Will talked about the system and how difficult it is. When you're on the ground talking to people, how do they respond when you're collecting signatures for an independent, for example?
So it's interesting because you can kind of break that down by almost in some ways partisanship, but in other ways you can break it down just by locations also. You will find I found that traveling across the country for this, um, certain places are more attuned and more keen to support independent candidates just as a default. I mean, there are certain places. Even certain parties that have have a pretty good footing in certain places. I mean, there is technically speaking, Bernie Sanders is still an independent in Vermont, and technically speaking, Angus King is still an independent senator in Maine. Both examples of states that have been that are fairly open to independent representation. The other thing is you can tell very quickly based on the first 2-3 seconds of an interaction whether someone is shall we say highly partisan in nature, and certain when it comes down to, I guess you can call it the tribalism that has developed in American politics, certain people will immediately become standoffish and want nothing to do with it. I have to say, based on call it anecdotal evidence, it does tend to be, interestingly enough, these days a lot more on the Democratic side, I would say, than the Republican or than the right, and that's changed over the years. I mean, it goes back and forth, but I would say over the last 2 or 3 cycles, it's really been skewed, and again, it depends on the location, depends on the type of whether they're used to candidates. But the other thing, and I think we'll talk about this a little later, is that not all states have extremely restrictive ballot access laws specific to independent third party candidates. I'm a Massachusetts attorney, and in Massachusetts, interestingly enough, the thresholds are pretty much the same for everyone. So everybody, if you're running statewide, no matter what party you're running for, you have to get 10,000 signatures. So it's interesting. Some states are a little bit more even, but some certainly are not. Indiana being one of the ones that has a very large skew in the requirements between.
Can you talk
the
about
major
that a little
states.
bit more, where Indiana fits in to sort of the national environment for those restrictions for independence?
I would say that it's just over. It's closer to to having some restrictive laws, certainly when it comes to independent candidates. Now, a party, in order to get, it's interesting because in order to become a political party, as you know, in Indiana, it's actually tied to the vote for the Secretary of State office. And I would say that the because the statewide requirements, number of requirements, it puts it up there as far as other states go. But the thing that I think does have Indiana, it does stand out with Indiana. It's one of the states where the skew between what's required for an independent or a new party is very much you know I don't know if it's 3 times before. I have to find the exact number, but it's
Yeah, so
significant.
I can actually
Yeah.
give you those numbers. The signature requirements, there's only one set of signature requirements for Republican and Democratic candidates, and that is if you're running for statewide office as a candidate for governor or for the U.S. Senate. And in those cases, you need to get at least 500 signatures in each of the 9 congressional districts across the state. So that's 4,500 signatures. And as I learned in the process, you really need to get about a third more because you're going to have signatures that are struck for various reasons. They might be illegible. Maybe somebody signed, put their old address, they're registered a new address, or vice versa. These voter, the county election boards, can strike a signature. They don't have to explain why, and there's no process to try to appeal those strikes. So signature gatherers typically want to get, 133% of whatever that number is. So if you look at that for the candidates who are running for, those races, Republicans and Democrats, 4,500, maybe closer to 7,000, you'd say, just to be on the safe side. If you wanted to run for those offices statewide as an independent or a third-party candidate that doesn't currently have access, the Libertarian Party is the only party that has ballot access, in addition to Republicans and Democrats in Indiana right now. Our calculations put that number, well, the actual number is in the high 30,000s. Then you add in that extra 33%. Based on sort of the average going rate for signatures, which depends on timing and who your signature gathering firm is, those kinds of things. But we sort of put that at about $15 a signature, probably a conservative number, but just for the sake of the argument, you're looking at $700,000 to $800,000 to get signatures to get on the ballot. And as you mentioned, Christopher, we're talking about 3-4 times what the Republican and Democrats are required to do. In no other races are there signature requirements for Republicans and Democrats. When I ran for Congress, we had to get over 4,000 signatures. We did a calculation based on the most recent districts, which may be changing, but the average is around 4,000 signatures for independent candidates for each of those districts, each of the 9 districts. Republicans and Democrats need 0. Doesn't cost them anything to file and get on the ballot, whereas an independent, our estimates show that number is somewhere around $70,000 just to show up. And so, to your point, Christopher, that is a very high burden. And I think that's why we don't see independents succeeding in those larger offices, whereas at the local level, we see a very, very big success rate. 244 independents ran all across the state the last 2 years. 52% of them won their races. And just for comparison's sake, during that same period, Republicans won 61% of their races, Democrats 35%. We're talking about folks who made it to the general election. But all those winners on the independent side were in those local races. Well, I wonder if you could talk about, from your perspective nationally, you were working with the Forward Party as they were trying to build something. What were the things that you saw that were well received, and maybe where were some things you saw that would be helpful for us to sort of learn from their efforts?
Yeah, I mean, to my eye, there are quite a few things there. I think it's just the briefest history lesson. So the last time there was a new successful political party in the United States was in the year 1856. The bicycle had been invented about 10 years earlier. So just for clarity, like that is the moment that we're capturing here. The Republican Party was a conglomeration of local efforts all across the country. So you had the Free Soilers, you had the abolitionists, you had an explicitly anti-slavery group that was kind of like a guerrilla organizing group in Kansas and Nebraska. All these different efforts were sort of incrementally working in their own local communities. And then these disparate groups kind of connected and coalesced into something bigger, obviously around the presidential election for Abraham Lincoln. Their first convention was 1856, and that was the foundation of the modern Republican Party. Every political effort to build a new political party since then that is even on our radars, because obviously a lot of folks have tried who don't even make the list, but Bull Moose, Reform Party, Green Party, Libertarian Party, No Labels, Forward Party, every single one of these efforts has gone about this the opposite direction. They've thought about building a national top-down bureaucratic infrastructure that kind of like franchises out locally, as opposed to thinking, okay, what's going on in Indiana? Because I am from Indiana and I deeply care about this work here and what we can do for the future of our state, the future of our community, our children, and our children's children. That's what founds a new political party hyper locally. That's what supports local independent candidates. And then in the future, if you want to team up with some folks in Nebraska who are doing something similar, or some folks in Mississippi or New York or California, be my guest. But to my eye, the biggest mistake is that immediate strategic tactical mistake of saying, okay, our country is broken. This is a problem. We have to go straight to the top and run for president in order to fix that problem. Instead of saying, the pothole right outside is broken. How do I be part of the solution to fixing that problem? So to my eye, this pivot, and it's one thing I find so exciting about independent Indiana, is this idea of let's take what already exists. 52%, hundreds of independent candidates have won over the course of the last 3 years in the state of Indiana. How do we build on that success and improve local communities and also improve our state community? And then we can start thinking about the national effort. But that's a couple years down the road. So I think it's that initial strategic mindset that's really, really powerful about what independent Indiana is up to.
Yeah. Christopher, I want to go back to the signature gathering piece of this. I've had people since we launched a few weeks ago, as they're learning about these signature requirements, they've asked, well, okay, can't you just get your signatures? Like, this is the rules. You got to do it. Get your volunteers, go out there and get them. How realistic is it for a group of people who want to run for Congress, let's say, one of them wants to run, or maybe somebody who's wanting to run for state legislature needs to get 1,000 signatures or, somewhere in there. How realistic is it for them to actually be able to do that?
So it can be realistic with difficulty, but the problem is when you're beginning any kind of political endeavor, obviously the work and effort of volunteers on the grassroots level is infinitely important, and it's also going to be in short supply no matter what. Even if you have a dedicated group of volunteers, the question is how can you continue engaging and being able to show, I guess, for lack of a better term, some benefit to their efforts. The thing is, signature gathering in particular, if you have never done it before, it is the easiest way to completely burn out volunteers. From what I've seen over the years, it takes a different type of mentality to be able to hustle, so to speak, to get signatures. And I will say, I'll forgive or ask for forgiveness if any of my managers or signature gatherers are watching, but I've often said that some of the same qualities that can make individuals very astute signature gatherers can also on occasion make them insufferable human beings. It does take a little bit. It takes it's a different type of.
You're just talking about persistence and being willing to
exactly.
ask someone for something that may not want to do.
Exactly, and also to the point where it requires the ability to deal with rejection and understand that it really is a numbers game. I mean, when I'm training signature gatherers, the first thing I say is, if any interaction is taking longer than 45 seconds, you're wasting time. There's unfortunately, and that actually goes back to the other part of this. If you're trying to build a political movement, you literally do not have time to engage with the public, to actually talk about issues or talk about platform, because you're so hyper focused on being able to attain this arbitrary goal of talking to as many of people as possible to get names on a piece of paper. And again, that type of effort, it burns volunteers out so quickly that it really can be a huge detriment. And also it depends, like I've said before, it depends on the location. So for example, here in Massachusetts, there's kind of I would say a culture that's a little bit more understanding of the petitioning process. Every couple of years, we have the ballot initiative process. You'll have, I think there were 42 initiatives filed this year, and at least 20 of them are out collecting signatures right now. But the thing is, in Massachusetts, it's what's called an open access state, meaning it because of court cases and because of court precedent and the protections involved in the free speech protections involved, you can set up in front of your local grocery store and set up a table, and the manager can't kick you out. Well, that's not the case in Indiana, for example. Indiana, it does not allow some of those same protections. I mean, I can tell you, I myself was kicked out of the public park in Fort Wayne, as a matter of fact. You think places where even there should be there is free speech protection,
Constitutional protections
constitutional
for that. Yeah.
protections, absolutely. And sometimes, and sometimes you're dealing with, especially law enforcement officials at the ground level that might not have had the right thing communicated to them as far as what the difference is between soliciting or signature gathering. I mean, that happens all across the country. It just, again, it when you're dealing with a state that does not have those open access protections and provisions, it is even harder to find places in which you will be able to gather signatures. And even in cases, let's say in front of a chain store, even when you're dealing with sympathetic individual managers who may not want to infringe on your rights, then you have to deal with if there's a corporate policy where you can't have petitioners. I mean, it's the bottom line, again, is when it comes to volunteers, it's the quickest way to burn them out is signature gathering.
So what you're really saying is, once you hit a certain threshold, you really need a professional firm to gather signatures for you if you're going to have a chance of meeting the threshold to get on the ballot.
That's correct, especially when you're dealing with tight windows and tight deadlines. A lot of states have windows that are very short compared to the signatures required. Some states have made things worse. I mean, I will tell you, New York in the last few years has changed the law up to require another, I believe it's 50,000 for a statewide election. But the problem is the signature gathering window, I think it's only about 4 weeks now, and there's a history and a real trend of certain states not only increasing signature requirements but tightening the windows in which you're allowed to gather those signatures. Looking back last year, there was some of the during the presidential petitioning. Texas was a perfect example of a state where you need 100,000, more than 100,000 signatures to get on the ballot as a presidential candidate, but also any of those individuals who have signed the petition, they can't have voted in a primary before they've signed that petition. And every state has their own level of scrutiny and their own level of laws and regulations. And then, as you mentioned, you're also dealing with not elected, but elections officials on the ground. So there in Indiana, I can recall several county clerks who were very willing to do their job and do it well as far as the signature verification goes, and others that were downright hostile to getting papers dropped off, and that really that happens all over the country. But at the end of the day, you're talking about such a large threshold and such a so many technical requirements that it's almost inevitable that if you are really serious about putting together an effort, a professional signature firm is just it's a have to.
Yeah, as you're talking, kind of the big question hanging over this is, in your professional opinion, and as somebody who works in this space all over the country, is there a good reason why these candidates should have to get these signatures? Or is it just they're trying to make it harder for people who aren't part of the two major parties?
I think the easiest way to answer that question is to actually look at the history of ballot access laws. And in the earliest elections in our country, there was often political parties themselves or tickets, or they would actually give ballots out for people to cast their ballots. Technically, everything was a write-in vote. Then there was the introduction in the kind of the late 1800s of what's called the Australian ballot, which was the idea of a government printed ballot that was a secret ballot. And the thing that really what took off from that moment is individual states putting their spin on election regulations, election laws. You can look at some of the most restrictive ballot access laws. If you look at where they actually came from, Georgia is a perfect example. During the Progressive era, the first ballot access laws in Georgia were passed very specifically to keep the Communist Party off the ballot, keep Communist Party candidates off the ballot, and there are several states where that, especially during the Progressive era, several states where it started implementing these restrictions. So, if you look at the origin, you look at the states that are especially restrictive these days. It's not hard to think that perhaps those are there as incumbent protection mechanisms, and to do whatever is possible to discourage competition. I also think it's worth noting sometimes states will allow quote unquote independent candidates a path to being on the ballot, while at the same time making it extremely restrictive for parties to be created. Tennessee is the first one that comes to mind on the presidential side. It's 25 signatures per congressional district, so it ends up being 275 for an independent candidate to get on the ballot. But for a new party, the number is something like 37,000 plus, with very restrictive timelines and also the verification, actually. So again, every state's different, but you have to wonder, a state. I bring up Massachusetts again just because there is a tremendous burden on petitioning in Massachusetts, but at the same time, you have the open access, and you have the fact that it's a level playing field for all the players. That's not the case, and again, at state like Indiana, state like Texas, state like New York, California. So yeah, you got to wonder why, for sure.
Well, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about something that I noticed in doing the research for tonight. There's a lot of polls of people across the country and how they feel about the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and if they want a new party, if they'd like a new party. And one poll that I saw said that 67% of Americans would like a new party. So my question for you is why don't we have one?
So the easiest answer I can say is I agree with Will's about the top down versus bottom up approach. I think has hindered the development of certain political parties over the years. I think that the the restrictions are certainly no question when it comes to the actual access, to the actual ballot access. But I think it comes down to money, and it also comes down to it comes down to we as voters as well. I think that when you're again, there are certain states and certain areas where there's more of a tradition of independents getting elected, but in certain states, sometimes it just comes down to that tribalism thing. So you'll also notice a lot of polling for independent candidates sometimes will be in the early stages of election, the polling numbers will be pretty good, and then by the time we get to election day, it just seems to trend off. Well, I think that's part of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because again, if you're burning out resources, you're burning out volunteer talent, and just having to run that marathon before you even get to the same starting point as the Democrats and Republicans. There's no question that trying to continue momentum of that variety through election day is going to be very difficult. There also is, especially in terms of when you have national elections, national cycles of presidential elections, or congressional elections, you get this hyper, I guess this kind of hyper drive in the media. Oh well, and by the parties themselves, you know, you don't want to split the vote. You don't want to, you know, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. You have to vote right down the line, whichever line is being promoted at that moment. And I think that, you know, a lot of times that the average voters will buy into that, and also, especially again with presidential years, you might be dealing with individuals who don't vote as often. So it's that's part of it, but I think that you can't really give an accurate data set of asking why these things have not why political movements and third parties have not had staying power when you're again dealing with these the restrictive regulations and restrictive requirements that Republicans and Democrats don't have to face. So how can you make a real call as to whether something could succeed or not when the playing field is not level?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, let me ask that question to you because you've actually, you know, been on the ground setting up state parties and dealing with some of these restrictions.
yeah. Everything Christopher just said right there is absolutely right. I'll put a finer point on two pieces of that. The first is, yes, there are massive systemic and structural barriers that prevent political parties from coming online. But there are also cultural barriers. My wife is French Canadian. There's a political party in Quebec that has real national influence, though nobody votes for this party outside of Quebec. That exists. Some version of that exists in pretty much every democracy on the planet except for the United States. The idea of a regional political party, they don't happen here. And it's not because there isn't a single state in this country where you couldn't go through the work to put together a political party. It's because there is a culture that says that there is a spectrum that starts over here and ends over here. And somewhere around here, these people are all Republicans and these people are all Democrats, and those are the rules. And then, so for example, regularly, when you ask the public how they identify, the vast majority, the plurality of people say independent. They'll say 40 at a 43%, 47%, 51% clip. People say they're independents, whereas 26% Republican, 24% Democrat, something like that. It changes every month. Pew puts this out once a month, and for the last 15 years, you can go back and read those numbers. It's going up incrementally. But most people identify as independents. There are real people in the media who say independents actually don't exist. Independents are actually just Republicans or Democrats in cheap clothing. They're just leaners one way or another. And the other big sort of impediment on this side is that we are so committed to this idea of first past the post voting. 50 plus 1% equals victory in the election, which means a new candidate showing up, a third option, is immediately tagged, rightly or wrongly, depending on the election, as a spoiler. I think Ralph Nader and Jill Stein did more to destroy the idea of a third viable candidate in any election than pretty much anybody in American history. But both major parties, mark my words, sink a ton of money into supporting that idea because they're fighting a World War I battle where the trenches have been drawn very clearly, and somebody coming over the top and dropping a bomb on the whole thing, a la World War II, is just not in their capacity to actually fight. Like, they don't know how to fight a war on that front. They've been locked in the same battle for a century and a half. So that's a huge piece of it. And so, yes, I think I'm seeing comments in the chat. Should there be structural and democratic reforms to change what we actually do and how these elections work and who has access to elections? Eric, absolutely. I believe that open primaries are a thing that would be useful to solve some of these problems. But also, we have to build a culture and an infrastructure and a political system around supporting candidates. And Nathan, as you've done over the last number of weeks, just educate the public that independent candidates can and do win elections on a relatively regular basis. So you have, I think, pretty rightly said 52% of the independents win, and everybody's first comment back to you is, oh yeah, but those are just local elections. Literally this last cycle in Nebraska, there was a Senate candidate, there were two Senate candidates running, one is a Democrat and one is an independent against incumbent Republicans. The independent got 10% more of the vote than the Democrat did, despite not having all the political assets of the major party behind them. Evan McMullin performed better than any Democrat has in the history of, or in the last 20 years of Utah politics in his election in 2016 or in 2020. So there's endless examples of independents actually doing really, really well at the state level. But we are so ingrained in this belief that, well, if they don't have an R or a D next to their name, they can't possibly win. I think a huge uphill battle is changing that narrative and making it very clear that we vote for people, we don't vote for parties, and people can win elections despite huge obstacles in the path before them.
Yeah, I want to ask you a follow-up about that trench warfare metaphor because it certainly feels very apt. But I also want to make sure that everybody who's on the call with us knows, I want to move to questions from you all. So if you have questions for Christopher or for Will or for both of them, please go ahead and put those in the chat. We'd love to have them address anything that particularly is on your mind. Well, I know that one of the other things that happened over the past year or so was this effort by a group called No Labels. And for me, outside looking in, it seemed like the two parties really went out of their way to try to attack them before there was even a candidate. Can you just talk about what you've seen the parties do to try to, create a narrative that something like that is actually dangerous?
Yeah. So just a little context. Nathan mentioned at the beginning I was the national organizing director for the Forward Party. Actually, after that, I was the national organizing director for No Labels. I built the infrastructure for a presidential campaign, the technology, the tools, the people infrastructure to actually run that campaign. We built a hell of a race car and didn't ultimately end up having a driver to run that campaign. So the reality for No Labels is actually quite similar to the reality for Forward, which is the major parties go out of their way to define any new effort as the other. So Republicans say that you're Democrats in sheep's clothing. Democrats say you're Republicans in sheep's clothing. And the reality of any of these efforts is they are actually not that. They're something else entirely. But when you're able to compress along this one sort of two-dimensional axis instead of allowing people to be multi-dimensional, you end up in a lot of trouble. So from a political standpoint, it's really smart work by Republicans and Democrats to sort of systematically destroy any new effort by claiming it's just part of the other side. And then that organization doesn't actually have the support of the other side. And so they wither on the vine. Now, both of those efforts are actually very resilient. And I think Forward and No Labels are both going to be around for a long time. And I think America is a better place for it. But I think local efforts can take a real lesson from that and realize that defining upfront who they are and what they do and going on the offensive early is a lesson that can be taken away from both those efforts. Communicating, this is what we are, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in.
Yeah. Christopher, we have a question here from Eric, and you're our resident lawyer panelist, so I think it might be a good one for you. His question, maybe we need to bring an equal protection case against straight ticket voting. What's your response to that?
So interestingly enough, there is a large body of case law out there on the federal level dealing with ballot access requirements for candidates in general. As far as straight ticket voting, there actually have been some instances where it's been turned over in certain states. It'd be interesting to see if an equal protection argument could hold water. The problem is, uh, with not just with the circuit Indiana, but you just I don't know if it would have the I don't. It would be very hard, frankly, to get the standing to actually overturn that. I think in Indiana, and I think that really, as frustrating as this may sound, the best way to try and to alleviate the straight ticket voting is really to go directly to the state legislature. And I know, that's a tall order. I get the same thing in Massachusetts all the time. Well, unfortunately, that there's not really any way to do it except for lobbying state legislature. But straight ticket, the existence of straight ticket voting, I think, is one of the most damaging things that we have had in our democracy. And I don't remember the exact stats, but there are several states that have gone away from a straight ticket a straight ticket option over the last 20 years or so. But it certainly remains very detrimental. And also, it's worth noting the states that do still have straight ticket voting also seem to be some of the states that have the most difficult paths for independent candidates, for sure. So, not the happiest response. Forgive me on that one, but that's kind of where we're at with that, I think.
Yeah. So we're getting close to 8 o'clock, and I always love to end these things early if possible, be respectful of people's time, but also if anybody else has questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I wonder if we could maybe close by hearing from each of you. We'll start with Christopher first and then with Will. I think sometimes people that I talk to, certainly, they feel like it's hard to have hope, especially when you're working in this space. And I wonder if each of you could talk about the things that you see right now that give you reason to have hope, and what keeps you going in terms of trying to create space for people who don't feel served by the two parties. Christopher, let's start with you.
Well, and again, full disclosure, I'm actually working, oddly enough, within the two-party system right now, but I'm also a Republican in Massachusetts, so I'm basically an independent anyway. So, but what I think it's worth noting, in the Republican Party in Massachusetts, certainly not the same makeup of the Republican Party of Indiana. Maybe you can make a lot of comparisons, maybe to Charlie Baker and Mitch Daniels, but maybe not the current crop there in Indiana, for sure. So,
by the way, Charlie is an Indiana resident now because he runs the MTA.
He is indeed. Yes, indeed. We miss him dearly. But so what gives me hope is the fact that more and more people are paying attention, and that alone, I think, is a positive development. I think that there's an understanding by, again, anybody, any side of or anywhere along the ideological spectrum. There is an understanding that what has been the status quo, the way we have been conducting our elections and the way we have been conducting our politics in this country for the past decade or so, is something's amiss. And I think, what, if nothing else, gives me hope, it's the fact that more and more people understand that as an axiom. They understand that that's kind of our starting point. Something is amiss and something needs to be done. Now, I think the arguments come in where you talk about, well, what are the solutions, and that's where I think real substantive policy debates really make a difference. But I do think just being able to frame and understand and to have a cohesive understanding of what the actual problem is, I feel like we can't necessarily put our finger on exactly what it is, but everybody knows something's wrong. And what the other thing that I will say, that I'm having a lot of success talking with people, whether it's on a local level, state level, I make a very big distinction between my political philosophy which is what would I like to see in a perfect world if I were, in a utopia, if I was a benevolent dictator, right? And the difference between that and my politics. My politics is what can I do right now on a policy level, on an actual ground level? What can I do right now in this lifetime that will better the lives of my friends, my family, the people I love, and people they love? How can I make my fellow human beings' existence better? And I think that even in this hyper partisan environment that we find ourselves in, I think more and more people are understanding that it does take coalitions. It takes reaching across the aisle. It takes different types of perspectives to come together to actually have real policy changes. And I think that especially when you're dealing with a local level or in the case of Indiana at the statewide level, when you're building the coalitions across the lines that can actually have a difference in policy, uh, that keeps me going. And I think that more and more people are waking up to that idea. And it's also, that's why I think this independent Indiana movement and the group that you started, Nathan, and all the people that are joining us here tonight. I do think this can turn into something extremely positive, not just for Indiana, but for the whole country. And that's what keeps me optimistic is people like everyone who's on this Zoom working to build coalitions and to have a real effect on everybody's lives from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, I want to give Will a chance to answer that, but we've got a great question here from Aurora that I want to make sure we get to. So she asked, can we react to the new law on school board elections being partisan? So just to give people some background on that, historically, or at least recently, school board elections in Indiana were nonpartisan. So there was no way to declare what party you were a member of. The state legislature passed a law this session changing that. So now school board candidates have to declare a party. They also could declare or file as nonpartisan or independent. Um, this law initially, the bill initially also included these people in a straight ticket vote. So if you're running as a Republican, you would get straight ticket Republican votes. It also required Republican and Democratic candidates to run in the primary first to get access to the general election. Those ended up being taken out of the bill before it passed. But the unique law that we have here in Indiana, which requires you, if you want to run as a Republican or a Democrat, to have voted for that party, voted in that party's primaries, the previous two primaries you voted in, or get the local county chairman of that party to certify that you are a Republican or are a Democrat. That law does apply to these school board candidates. So if you live in a district that is primarily Republican, let's say, and you say, well, I'm kind of in the middle. I guess I lean a little bit more Republican. If you have not voted in two Republican primaries and they haven't been the two most recent primaries that you voted in Indiana, you have to get your chair sign off. Historically, the county chairs have not done that in the state, Republican and Democrat. They oftentimes what appears to be they use that as a way to sort of keep people off of the ballot. And so, Aurora, to answer your question from our perspective, we think that there are probably a lot of folks, current school board members and folks who are considering running for the first time next year, who may be more interested in running as an independent because they've never had to declare a party before and they don't really feel like declaring one or the other either as the right fit for their views and their values, or they don't have the primary voting record to qualify. So we're investigating on our end if there's ways that we can provide information and resources to support them, because we think, these races are obviously as important as any of the other races, and the fact that the state legislature partisanized them, despite the fact that I have not heard any Hoosier say, "Hey, let's make those races. Let's bring more partisanship to our elections." We think that's something that we should be involved in, and a potential area for us to really be beneficial to folks around the state. Aurora, does that help answer your question? Hopefully. I'm gonna now go to Will here in our closing minutes and give you an opportunity to answer that question about what makes you hopeful and keeps you doing this work, Will.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say just Aurora, to answer directly, politicizing our education system, I think is unequivocally bad. That is counter to the point of what we're trying to do, and making that a sort of partisan spitting contest is a terrible idea. But Nathan, to answer your question, what makes me excited, what makes me motivated? At the risk of sounding too sappy, it's you and people like you. It's no, I mean this really. So my early career was in Republican politics, and then I worked at a sort of politically oriented software company for a long time. And about 6 years ago, I made a radical change and started working with independent candidates and campaigns and causes and efforts and movements and political parties. And it has been incredibly difficult and largely unsuccessful, tragically. But I have spent most of the last couple of years listening to people, and I have a consulting firm where I work with people, and I get inbox requests. I get emails probably at this point 15, 20 a week of well-meaning people around the country who are like, I have this idea for how to fix it. What can we do? How do I do this? Most of the ideas are silly. Some of the ideas are really, really good. Our relationship started when you sent me one of those emails. There are really good, motivated people doing incredible work to start new organizations, to volunteer for efforts like this, for the Forward Party, for No Libya, for all kinds of efforts all around the country, who actually step up and run for office and really take a huge risk. And it's because they believe in their local community. They believe in their family. They believe in their society. They believe in their state and their country. There is nothing more patriotic than taking a risk to fight for democracy in your country. And so, to my eye, it is seeing people take risks and put themselves and their reputation, their time, and their money on the line to support something they truly believe in. That's what fires me up. That's why I'm here.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to end, a great thought to end with, and want to thank Will Conway and Christopher Thrasher for joining us today, and want to thank all of you for your interest and for your engagement, for your willingness to join us tonight. If you feel like there's been value in this conversation and want to share it with some friends, we're going to be posting that on our website and our YouTube channel. We'll post this whole recording. It'll be there sometime tomorrow, and we'll also send a follow-up email as well. So thank you again. And as I've been signing off my emails lately, yours in democracy, and I think that's true for all of us here tonight. Thank you, and have a great evening.